Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're looking at the 2026 governor elections video, and this video is the latest in my series on looking at some of the closest races that are happening. This video is going to focus on the governor's race in the state of Michigan. So Michigan, there's a lot to get into. First things first, if you are unfamiliar with Michigan in terms of how competitive of a state it is, well, I'm going to show you some quick results here. Michigan has been one of the closest states at the presidential level and Senate level in all of the United States in the past few election cycles. In 2024, the last election before the midterms, obviously, President Trump won the state over former Vice President Kamala Harris, and he won it by about 1.4%. I'll be going more into the results by the county in just one moment. But Trump won by 1.4%, very close. In 2020, the Democrat Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump in the state of Michigan by 2.8%. Again, a swing state, a battleground state, very close in that one as well. And then in 2016, the third presidential election back from that, it went for Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton by only 0.22%. That's on the presidential side. On the Senate side, it may arguably be even closer based on the 2024 results, where it voted for the Democrat Elisa Slotkin over the Republican Mike Rogers by only 0.34%. And going back to the 2020 election, on the same ballot where Trump lost the state by 2.8%, the Democratic incumbent Gary Peters won by 1.7%. So for the presidential and the Senate elections, it's been a very, very competitive state in the state of Michigan. On the governor level, it's actually been a little bit more Democratic friendly than you may expect when you look at the presidential race and you look at the Senate races. So in 2022, and I have this map pulled up as well, the Democratic governor of the state, Gretchen Whitmer, won this governor's race by 10.5% against the Republican Tudor Dixon. A 10.5% win falls under the category of 5 and 15 points, which would be considered a likely Democratic win. So a race that the Republicans in the right environment could win, but overall the Democrats would be pretty reliable to hold on there. So that's what Whitmer did in 2022. And in 2018, her results were very similar. She, at the time, flipped this governor's race from red to blue. The current governor was a Republican, and Whitmer won this race by 9.6% over the Republican Bill Schwett. Now, going back to 2014, the Republican midterm year was the last time it went red at the governor level, where then Republican Governor Rick Snyder won it by 4.1%. That was obviously before all the scandals with the Flint, Michigan water crisis and all that. So Michigan, the last time there was a Republican was 2014. Republicans would love to win this governor's race and flip it from blue to red, though Gretchen Whitmer, both in her two elections in 2018 and in 2022, won the state rather handily. So it's going to be interesting, Michigan, for 2026. Now that Whitmer is term limited and cannot seek another term, do the Democrats do worse now that she's not at the top of the ticket, or do the Democrats continue to bring that momentum that Whitmer had in the two governor's races, and how do they end up performing? Well, first things first, I do want to just talk about that the primaries underway for Michigan. Actually, no, I'm going to come back later on in the video to that part, to the primaries. First things first, I'm going to talk about President Trump's approval rating, where Trump's currently sitting at 39.7% approval as of today. Now, that's important to mention because even though it is a governor's race and governor's races are typically more local, usually these midterm elections do come in a sort of a wave type election where the president or the president's party that's in charge typically does not do as well in the midterms. Now, President Trump being down roughly about 20 points, and the approval polls may even expedite that process and lead to the Democrats having an even better night than expected. So on the presidential approval side of things, certainly it seems the Democrats are in for a great night. On the generic ballot side as well, the Democrats are leading now by a very substantial amount at 46% approved for the Democrats to 39.7% for the Republicans, almost roughly around a 7-point lead for the Democrats on this one, is showing a certain amount of growth here for the Democrats. So from the national environment of President Trump's approval ratings and the generic ballot, this sets the Democrats up for a very strong election night. Now, for the state of Michigan, we can look at the 2024 map. Michigan, obviously, the key areas to talk about by population. Overall, Donald Trump got about 2.8 million votes in the presidential race. Kamala Harris got about 2.7 million votes, give or take a few 10 to 20,000 votes or so. The key area, Detroit, Wayne County, this is where some of the most people in the entire state live. When you look at the margin map here, a lot of the people in the state of Michigan are clustered in these counties and surrounding Michigan. And this is roughly about a 30-point victory for Harris over Trump there. That's going to be a big area for Democratic turnout. when everything is said and done, that's a place to watch for. That's on the presidential side in 2024. In 2020, when Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump in the state of Michigan, he got roughly about 2.8 million votes. Trump got about 2.6 million votes, and you would see it was roughly about a 38% win in Wayne County in Detroit. So we can look actually on the 2024 map and see how the state swung, and you can see Wayne County shifted about 9 points towards Donald Trump from Joe Biden from 2020 to 2024. And you look across the state of Michigan, pretty much most of the counties shifted red. There were a few that shifted blue, like Ottawa County shifted blue, Benzie County and Grand Traverse, Lalanu, I believe it is, and Presque Isle all shifted to the Democrat Kamala Harris as well, and Emmett County as well. But these are some key areas to watch for when you look at this map and you see the percentages of some of these closer counties like Saginaw County, where Trump barely won it by a few points. This could be an important indicator in the governor's race. If this county is going red or going blue, that could be an indicator of how things are going. Muskegon County, only a 2-point win for Trump, could be another one. Berrien County, which voted for 8 points for Trump, that could be an important one to watch for as well. As for the governor's races, in 2022, I showed the result where Whitmer won by over 10 points. In 2022, she defeated the Republican Tudor Dixon by a pretty substantial amount. You see these margins here in Wayne County, nearly 71-28. In Wayne County, Washtenaw County, 75-23. And you can look at these areas like Saginaw County voting for Gretchen Whitmer over Tudor Dixon by roughly about 8 points. So a big swing there. Muskegon voted for Whitmer by 9. Berrien County was only about a 5-point win for Dixon. So these are key areas to keep an eye out for on the governor's side of things. So I want to do a preview of the map now before getting into the race for 2026 specifically. Because in this election environment, yes, Michigan voted for Donald Trump in 2024. Yes, it is an open race. Typically, it's harder in governor's races for a party to win 3 consecutive elections when it's an open race. It's just kind of a weird thing with governor's races that usually happen. But if this election were just a Democrat versus a Republican, given the election environment of 2026, President Trump's current approval ratings and the generic ballot ratings for Democrats versus Republicans, Democrats would probably win this race and probably win it pretty decently handedly. But this race is very interesting due to the fact there's an independent candidate running in this race. Now, his name is Mike Duggan, and Mike Duggan is currently a Democrat, and he is serving as the mayor of Detroit. And as a Democrat running for independent for governor, he's someone that obviously is going to take away a lot of votes from one of the key areas of the state of Michigan, the city of Detroit in Wayne County. This is one of the biggest Democratic voting blocks for the Democrats. So him being in this race is going to be very important in terms of how much vote percentage does he actually get. Because the Democrats, to win this governor's race, even though it is a more favorable election environment, they're going to need big numbers out of the population centers like Detroit, neighboring Muskegon County, and these areas that surround Wayne County. If Mike Duggan, the independent, is getting more Democrats and Republicans, especially in a very blue area, that gives the Republicans a much better chance at winning a governor's race they probably otherwise wouldn't. Now, things are still, and I'll show you the polling in 1 second here, how interesting this race really ultimately is. On the Democratic side, there are 3 Democratic candidates currently in the race, but the candidate that's going to end up being the nominee in all likelihood is Jocelyn Benson, who is the Michigan Secretary of State. She'll be representing the Democratic side. On the Republican side, there are a few Republican candidates in the race. The 3 most notable candidates, I would say, are Perry Johnson, John James, the U.S. Representative, and Mike Cox, the former Michigan Attorney General. Now, for a while, I would say it's pretty likely it's going to be John James. He's leading in the polling averages against Perry Johnson by about 10.4%. There is still 35.6% that is undecided, so it's possible that Perry Johnson could ultimately end up winning this Republican primary, but the long assumption has been that U.S. Representative John James of the 10th District will be the Republican nominee for governor. And again, Mike Duggan as an independent candidate is certainly very big. He's also raised $5 million in this race, so he's getting some pretty significant money for this race as well. As for the political prediction rankings, 3 out of the 4 top political prediction sites, Cook Political Report, Inside Elections, and Established Crystal Ball, all have the race listed as a toss-up. Race to the White House does have it listed as tilt for the Democrats. Mike Duggan does have some notable endorsements in the state of Michigan as well. For Benson versus James versus Mike Duggan, this is why this race is so fascinating, is look at these polling numbers here. The polling averages for Race to the White House in Real Clear Politics, Jocelyn Benson has 34.8%. Again, she's the Democratic candidate. John James, the Republican, currently has 29.9%. But Mike Duggan, the independent candidate, or Democrat running as independent, has 20.7% of the vote. And there's still roughly about 14.6% undecided based on this polling average. On the Real Clear Politics one, Benson's at 36, John James is at 31, and Mike Duggan is also at 20.7. So overall, they average out to 35.4% for Benson, John James is at 30.5, Mike Duggan's at 20.7, with other or undecided still at 13.4%. So even as of today, even with Mike Duggan in the race, splitting the vote, it still is a race the Democrats are currently favored in, and the Democrats have a pretty significant lead at this current point in time of 4.9%. But the vote totals are really interesting because I can't really think of a governor's race or a Senate race recently where there's been an independent candidate like Mike Duggan that's gotten a very significant amount of the vote. And I know the Oregon governor's race from 2022, the independent candidate, I believe, got like 8 or 9%, and that ended up playing a very significant role in the race being very competitive. Mike Duggan is currently getting 20.7%. I don't know if Mike Duggan's going to be able to get enough support to necessarily win this race, seeing as the Democrats and Republicans are getting already roughly above 30% of the vote or more. Mike Duggan would essentially have to win all the undecided voters to even have a chance at catching John James or Jocelyn Benson, which I don't think it's going to happen. But Mike Duggan is clearly playing a very large role in this race. It's also interesting that based on the polling data, 35.4 for Benson, 30.5 for James, with Duggan at 20.7. Looking at the 2022 results, Mike Duggan seems to be not only taking Democratic votes away, because if you added those votes up, it would roughly bring the vote totals for Jocelyn Benson, if you added the 13%, all the undecideds would bring her up to about 48.4% or 48.8% or so. That's still roughly about 5% or 6% down from what Gretchen Whitmer got in 2022. So Mike Duggan's not just pulling votes away that the Democrat would usually get, he's also pulling some votes away from John James, the Republican, as well, which is what's making his candidacy so interesting. If Mike Duggan is only going to end up pulling votes away from the Democrats and pretty much none from the Republicans, John James would probably be leading in this Republican, as the Republican in this race, and probably by a decent amount. He would be up like at 40%. Jocelyn Benson would probably be down maybe a similar margin of like 33% or so. And Mike Duggan's numbers maybe would be a little bit higher, a little bit lower, depending. But Mike Duggan clearly is getting a good amount of voters on the Democratic and Republican side, with still 13.4%. So where Whitmer versus the Republicans of the past was just a 1v1 Democrat versus Republican, ended up being about a 10-point Democratic win here. There is enough math out there for the Democrats to win this race by a similar margin, but Mike Duggan being in this race seems that he's taking a good amount of Democratic and Republican voters away. And my current analysis of this race is that it's going to remain relatively competitive, and I think it's going to remain under 5 points when everything is said and done, due to the fact that he is getting a large amount of voters of both the Democratic and Republican side. So as for this race, for the governor's race, how I currently have it right now, I'm pretty much in complete lockstep with the polls in this race, and I would have Michigan as lean for the Democrats, which means it would be anywhere from 5 to 1 point, depending on the margin of victory, meaning it could go as low as 1 point for the Democrat or 5 points as high for the Democrats. It is possible it can go above 5, but I think the vote splitting is certainly going to be enough to keep this race competitive. The election environment, President Trump's approval ratings, and the generic ballot certainly suggest the Democrats are in for a very strong night, and that alone would probably be enough to shift the race towards the Democrats. But Mike Duggan being in the race is adding a very interesting wrinkle and an unpredictability aspect for this race. So Michigan's governor's race I really find interesting, and I love kind of following for this election cycle, because it's not too often you see an independent candidate making a run and getting a considerable amount of the vote. I mean, above 20% of the vote in the generic or in the general elections, just not something that usually happens in elections like this. So it's very interesting. I hope you found it interesting as well. If you did, make sure to hit like and subscribe. Leave all your thoughts down below on this governor's race. Who do you think is going to win between Jocelyn Benson, John James, or Mike Duggan, or maybe even any of the other Republican or Democratic candidates running as well? For now, thank you so much for watching. Again, please remember to hit like and subscribe, and hope to see you in a future video.